Welcome to the Becoming Superhuman podcast, where we interview extraordinary people to bring you the skills and strategies to overcome the impossible. And now, here's your host, Jonathan Levy.
Before we get started today, I just want to let you guys know that this episode is brought to you by Four Sigmatic Foods. Now, some of you may remember our interview with the founder and CEO of Four Sigmatic, Tero Isokauppila, where we talked about reishi mushrooms, lion's mane, cordyceps, chaga, and tons of other mushroom varieties that you can and should be incorporating into your diet for optimal health. Now, so many of you have reached out and told us how you took advantage of that exclusive 15% discount that we offered and that you really enjoyed the products that we actually wanted to feature Four Sigmatic again on this episode as a sponsor. So to take advantage of that 15% discount code and try some of their highly recommended mushroom supplement products, visit jle.vi/mushrooms. Greetings, super friends, and welcome to today's show. Before we get started, I want to read you guys an awesome review from Mr. Glenn Matheson of Norway, who says, "This is my absolute favorite podcast." Oh, that's amazing. Great guests, and Jonathan does a great job asking all the right questions. Thanks for this. Learn a lot every time. Well, thank you, Glenn, for leaving us such a fantastic review. It definitely made my day, and I look forward to seeing the reviews of anyone and everyone out there. So please take a moment after listening to this episode to leave us a review. It definitely helps us in the rankings. It definitely helps us get those better guests, those great guests that we always have, and just makes me feel awesome. On to today's show. Today, we are joined by yet another incredible expert that I met during the Summit at Sea conference late last year. I know what you're thinking, and yes, that was probably the best investment I've ever made of time or money. Now, as someone who doesn't drink alcohol, I was particularly happy to meet today's guest because he's an expert in, get this, non-alcoholic elixirs and cocktails. Now, I know what you're thinking. What the hell does this have to do with becoming superhuman? Well, today our guest is going to talk to you about his company, which is called Elixirs. And it's a company where he and his team develop and produce these powerful cocktails with loads of health and emotional and mood and spiritual benefits. So after trying just about everything that he had to offer on his menu, I was determined to get him on the show and pick his brain about some of the substances that he actually introduced me to. Now, it took the better part of half a year, but I'm happy to say that we finally got time to sit down and talk. So in this episode, you guys, we talk about everything from traditional herbs and plants used for healing and mood improvement, all the way up to the flow of energy in our bodies and in our lives. We talk about spiritual exploration. We talk about existentialism and just about everything in between. We also go into some of the specific plants and substances that you may never have heard of. I had never heard of them. And also why it might behoove you to experiment with them in your own lives. Now, I just want to apologize in advance. We did have some internet connectivity issues. I'm not sure if they were on my side or on the guest side, but there are some cutouts. There might be some jumping around, and you might miss a word here or there. I think overall, everything is very clear. Our editor's done a fantastic job stitching all the pieces together with the disconnections, but I do want to apologize and let you know about that in advance. I think nonetheless, you'll take away a ton of valuable, incredible information and wisdom from today's guest. And so I'm very excited to introduce you all to my super friend, Mr. Colter Merrick. Colter, my friend, good morning, good evening. I'm so excited to finally have you on the show, man. I think my audience should know that I was so impressed by you that I was willing to take an 8 a.m. call the day after Israeli Burning Man just to get you on the phone and just to bring your message to them. So welcome.
Delighted to be here, man. I had a really great time at Summit connecting with you and share the magic and share the love I have with nature, and especially send that message halfway across the world.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So you've been really, really busy since we met in November. What have you been up to? What are you up to now? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, The wintertime, I live up in the mountains, and I'm a pretty avid skier in that respect. And, running my business a full-time gig. We just recently finished up Lightning in a Bottle, which is a pretty big festival, about 30,000 people. And we brought our bar out there and set it up next to a stage in the village where there was just some really incredible ceremony and people really connected to nature and ceremony and music and celebration and, just creating an atmosphere for people to connect and to elevate their consciousness. And we had a huge success there. We have remodeled our business a little bit and did some additions. It's kind of put down a little bit this winter. I had a pretty bad ski crash, so I had some recovery time on that, but I'm strong to say that I'm back on my feet and pretty much 100% recovered from that.
Oh, wow.
Some big plans for the future. We just got a new product kind of developed, our Saffron Spice Latte, and we're getting ready to launch that to the world and trying to hit bigger, better markets, stepping outside of Nevada City.
Wow, amazing. And then, so now you mentioned you're in Vegas at a World Tea Conference. I didn't know such a thing existed, but I have a feeling I need to go next year.
It's a pretty special thing where it started in a lot of ways for me. There's a lot of things that got me on my path here, but traditional Camellia sinensis tea ceremony, it's a really good look at a plant that has influenced the world in such a large way. Pretty much every country has a tradition or culture around tea that varies quite a bit from country to country. And learning about the ground that it's making in America. America doesn't have as strong of a foothold as some of the other places, but it's a very large and growing business. And, it's good to kind of come back to the roots and see what people are doing out there.
Absolutely. That sounds really incredible. So, Colter, I mentioned in the intro to our guests a little bit about my awesome experience with your products and a little bit about who you are and what you do. But I think what you just said, starting out and how this conference ties into some of your roots in the industry is a really nice segue into how'd you become the herbal elixir man, like the tea god, as I called you when I was walking around the cruise ship?
Appreciate some kind words there. It's exciting. I mean, it starts just with the love of nature, really. It started for me, it's kind of an experiment. So just try to find the treasures of nature, reading about benefits of nature, and then just ingesting them and starting to experience them and figuring out ways to concentrate them to potentiate their effects. And then, a lot of those herbs and things a lot of them are pretty bitter and pretty hard to ingest. And so finding ways to blend them and, and also being able to find mainstream applications to integrate that in people's lifestyles so they're not a foreign thing. That's kind of the beginning. We've come a long way since then because I tie in what I do to such a larger part than just what the herbs are. Because, you can look at things on a clinical way to say that this is the physiology, this is how am I affecting my physiology, and look at it like that. But you can also look at the energetics of something, of how it's raising your spirit and the relationship you have to it. And some things are a lot deeper than others. I mean, there's a lot of different levels to look at. Sometimes talking about spirit and relations with spirit, kind of turns people off. And, but what I like to tell people is these plants, they're living beings. They were alive at one time and they have a spirit. And learning how to communicate with them is a big part of the practice. And sometimes just a simple ceremony where you're setting intention and you're having gratitude is a starting place. And then trying to find a platform that integrates that into a mainstream relationship with these plants so people can develop that is another element of it that, has really tied me in. But once we kind of put up this brick and mortar and we started realizing, we started out 4 years ago, I think you got to experience the tradition that we started called Kava Cacao. And when I first opened Elixir, it was basically a large format landscape photography gallery, really high-end photography gallery. And I introduced a 6-person tea bar. And Friday night, we started doing a ceremonial thing with Kava and Cacao. And we just really started seeing how people were connecting with each other and how some of these substances just opened up the heart. They created more talkativeness, more bonding, more social connection. And that's where I feel most of the medicine in. I mean, there is another element of the self-empowerment. And so, it's take it out of like, what's this herb supposed to do? And to like, this is why I'm taking this herb because this is how it makes me feel. So much of the time, we have this relationship where we're disempowered. We go to our doctor and he tells us what to take and we're forced to kind of follow his advice without any knowledge or reason why. And it's important for me to say that it's, I'm not here to give medical advice or anything like that, but I'm a very good observer. When I stand behind my Elixir bar, and I introduce something for someone to try, and they have a response where they're like have an experience that totally captivates them and totally changes how they perceive things, and their gratitude, but their connection to the plant is self-empowering, where they're making the choice to go back to that plant again and continue their experience with it. So that's kind of a nutshell. I can go on and on all these different layers of how this practice works, but to sum it up, it's a love of nature and building the related treasures of nature.
I love it. And I think my audience is now starting to understand why it was so important for me to get you on the show, because not only is it amazing the way you've presented these little known, I'm a self-proclaimed biohacker, and you were introducing me to a lot of stuff I didn't know, but I think it's really interesting the level of understanding with which you approach your craft. So I would come to you every night and be like, hey, Colter, tonight I think I want to dance all night. I don't drink alcohol. Don't want to do any drugs. What do you got for me? And you'd pour me some delicious beverage, and I would be out there, on the stage dancing all night. Next night, hey, we're trying to have a really heart-to-heart conversation here in the tea lounge. What do you have for us? And you'd give me and a friend something else. And without fail, you always kind of hit the nail on the head as to exactly what kind of night I wanted to have. And I thought that was incredible.
Cool. I appreciate that. Yeah. A lot of times it's the plants, and they have a voice too. We got some star players, and, without a doubt, they aim to please for sure.
So, Colter, as you know, I'm super interested in learning. So anytime I find someone like yourself who knows something about really something that's very obscure, we're not talking about Camellia sinensis here. We're not even talking about mate. We're talking about things that probably when you learned about them were very obscure. So what I'd like to maybe explore a little bit is, you mentioned experimenting, you mentioned stuff like that. How did you start learning about this stuff? What resources did you pick up? Did you start going through books? Did you start talking to people? Was it a matter of, digging through your local farmer's market? How did you learn so much that helps you run your business the way you do today?
Yeah, I was reflecting on that today. It's a long journey in a sense, and just shorten that story a little bit. But, basically there were some herbs that I really started with, I think my first real infatuation with it, was kind of like looking at the sensual side of herbs and things that were aphrodisiac, and so I started kind of just doing research and going, this has aphrodisiac properties, this has these kind of properties. And, in the Chinese medicine system, and in Chinese herbs, there's a pretty vast body of knowledge that you can unravel there. And, like yang tonics and just kind of understanding some of the explanations of the way that they classify their herbs was kind of, I think, one of the first things that excited me. And, to explain a yang tonic a little bit, or what they call a jing tonic, which jing is what they're describing as like the sexual fluid, the spinal cerebral fluid, the creative fluid. It's kind of regulated by the kidneys. And it's kind of a way that the body stores energy, and a certain type of energy. And the yang is kind of the expression of that energy. The yin is kind of the like putting the money in the bank, and the yang is kind of spending that money. And it relates to hot and cold in different ways that your energy flows in your body. And there's a lot more to that as well, as how well the energy flows in your body, and they have all these meridians and chi points and ways to get energy flowing through your body. So the energy you are using becomes a lot more efficient, a lot more effective. So the Chinese medicine system is a really good place to kind of tap in, to kind of see how many different herbs and different effects and different combinations there can be. And, and again, without going too much into a real formal background, because you can take you down a lot of different paths, and my objective was a little different. I feel that experience is the best teacher. And so I started playing around with these herbs, and I started seeing how they affected me and how to increase their effects. And then, worked with combinations, as well as, looking at traditional formulas and seeing how those work and seeing what I liked about it, and started breaking them down.
Trial and error, really.
Trial and error, Also the South American herb, very amazing botanical encyclopedia. And not to get too far off kind of where a mainstream application is, but there's also a class of herbs called ethnogens, which kind of means the God within, and things that really have a really profound spiritual connection that kind of take you into the spirit world and really open up your perspective of who you are, and, where the limitations start and what self-imposed limitations you have. And, that may be a conversation for another time, but that definitely was something that started my fascination with that. And, really understanding the altered state a little bit, and even on the most subtle altered state, like taking ginseng or something like that. And another thing is the adaptogenic class of herbs, which basically allow you to adapt to your surroundings, to different stresses, to handle stresses, a lot of things that people find problematic and use, different medications for anxiety and stress. And, stress is probably one of the biggest and most harmful contributors to someone's ill health. And so things that help you manage that or actually adapt to that, as well as, adaptability is one of the keys to survival. And so the more that we can adapt to harmful situations and learn to thrive in this world. And so that's kind of a little bit of how many different directions these things can go. But what I found was, when I looked at the world out there, I saw that, there's a hard, big, heavy body of information in terms of our medicine and how we structure our medicine. And I find that there's so much special interest there that's not really telling to the whole truth of things. But obviously, it's a very prevalent part of our society and culture. And, I could sit here and fight and talk against it, but, I'm not one to try to oppose, create wasted energy. But, I do have some differences of opinion about that. So with that, I wanted to find a way to find a mainstream application. So it was kind of tucked in underneath it all so they could receive the benefits without having to be in this conversation of that. And this was quite a few years later, but I started with this idea for an herbal wine company.
Oh, cool.
I started formulating herbal wine, and at that time I was combining alcohol with it. I grew up in a ski town, and I lived kind of as a hedonist, so I was pretty exposed to just a celebrating culture of always on vacation and so on and so forth. So I started on this wine project. I developed a few formulas. I developed a meditation formula, an aphrodisiac formula, and I went to wine entrepreneurship programs, Sonoma State, and learned a lot about the wine business and made some pretty neat products, actually, and kind of learned I didn't really want to be in the wine business, actually, to be honest with you. And the more I started really focusing on my health and wellness, I didn't really find that there was a place for the alcohol. And an expression of that, I want to say, though, the two parts of our physiology, that our spirit and elevating our spirit and to create joy and to create positive experiences is as much a medicine as anything else. And so going out to a social setting and celebrating and, things that make you happy and bring you joy, are valuable. And I know that in our culture, alcohol is used very widespread, and there's a lot of good times that come from it. And I think can be a lot of benefits. Obviously, with anything, it can be overdone. And our body is a poison control center. And if we bring the right nutrients in and we nourish ourselves, we have the ability to process toxins and to be able to heal ourselves. And, I can go into a little bit about, other parts of the health and wellness that we use for healing and cleansing and things like that. To stay a little bit more focused on just the herbs and the drinks and the elixirs that I make to create that libation, to bring and elevate our spirit is, a primary part of just, I think, an important part of all our lives is just to create joy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's where my main focus is.
Absolutely. And, I want to mention, though, that you and I are so on the exact same wavelength, because I had last week, actually, with a plant substance, a kind of epiphany about exactly what you were talking about, which was energies and these ideas that are so common in Eastern philosophy that, hey, they knew that all matter, including us, was made of energy thousands and thousands of years ago, and said, wait a minute, if we are made of energy, if the matter in our bodies is made of energy, then that energy can be influenced, right? And input and output. And I had this kind of very intense experience where I actually felt physical transfer of energy with another human being who was in a state of distress. I was in a state of calm. And just by touching that person, I actually felt myself becoming uneasy, angry, agitated. And she felt herself become less agitated, more calm, was able to take a deep breath. I just had this insane experience, again, with the help of some of these plants, where I was like, oh my gosh, why is energy not a bigger focus in everything that we're doing? Why are we not asking, how is the Valium influencing the actual energetic flow in my body? So I think it's really interesting that you mentioned that here and now, a couple of days later.
Yeah, well said. There's just simple notes that are kind of wrapped into the practice. And one is reflection. And, that's really where I gained a lot of insight to just the basic tea ceremony is you sit down, you put your intention in, you reflect on how something's affected you. You know, a lot of times we just put something in and it's one more accessory in our busy life. And so being able to reflect and bring awareness to how things are affecting you, no matter how subtle they are, you know, is such a big part of empowerment. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because energetics is such a huge part. And the more you're clear to be aware and tune into that, the more you're going to be able to adapt and benefit from those subtle changes.
Absolutely. Do you have any resources or books you'd recommend I check out if I want to start learning a little bit about this flow of energy in the body?
You know, I was kind of looking at that question. Well, I mean, related to that question, I would say The Hands of Light, Barbara McKittrick. I don't know, if you look up Hands of Light, it's basically kind of all about the energetic exchange and how healing modalities with touch. And, you know, it's not really my expertise, but it's something that, you know, early on I was really into and really understanding how energy flows. I mean, I don't really have a list of reference.
That's a solid start point.
Yeah.
So we touched a little on the learning, Colter. I want to get into some of these actual herbs and plants, because I have to admit, I've done a little bit of research on them. My Summit at Sea notebook was literally full of names of stuff that you gave me. And like, can I find it here in Israel? And can I do this? And how does it work? And why did I feel this way? So if we could, I'd love to go through piece by piece some of the herbs and kind of plants that you guys use and share a little bit with our audience what they are. I'd assume actually a lot of people haven't even heard of them. Could we start maybe with Kava? Because that's one that you mentioned before, and I particularly remember being like, whoa, this has a huge effect on my physical well-being.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to talk about that one. It's definitely one of my star players there. And, you know, there's lots to tell. But to start with, you know, basically it's a Polynesian Pacific Island tradition of about 3,000 years. And you know, there's a lot of traditional uses for it and really powerful cultural effects. You know, it was kind of used for gaining access to the spirit world, but it also was a welcoming and a gesture of peace and an offering of how people exchange things. They also used it as ways to solve problems. You know, if there was trouble in a village or a tribe, they'd all sit in on the Kava ceremony and they would basically come in and drink Kava until they solved their problems, you know, because I like to call it the root of happiness. Some of the effects you'll experience from it is, you know, relaxation, talkativeness, euphoria, has a real bonding element. And a lot of times it can be described as alcohol a little bit in the sense that it causes that state of relaxation. The best thing about it, though, is it doesn't affect the thoughts. Your thoughts remain clear, right. Unlike alcohol. The deeper you go, the more inebriated you become. So again, you know, it brings back that clarity of really getting to this comfortable state where we kind of break through our inhibitions and, you know, really can create a really great positive social experience, you know, as well as combating stress and anxiety and things like that. I drink it quite often myself. It does have like therapeutic uses for anxiety. There's another thing that, you know, is really fascinating about it, you know, and there's always more research to be done. And, you know, I want to touch a little bit about some of the perceptions of Kava, but addiction control, it's one of the few substances out there that actually works in a reverse tolerance kind of way, meaning that the more of it you have in your system, the less it actually takes to get the effect.
Wow.
So it essentially weans you off itself as you drink it. So it's a pretty unique substance. This may be a controversial topic, and I just want to mention it a little bit because, you know, just expressing my research and, you know, because I'm such a strong advocate of Kava, there are claims, you know, that it's harmful to the liver and that it creates toxicity in the liver. And, you know, it's really interesting, you know, when you kind of start digging into this research a little bit, because what is known about it and the case study that they do have, which is very small, is pretty inconclusive. I just want to bring this into generality about the relation to the pharmaceutical industry and a way a lot of our press and media kind of comes about. And again, it's a pretty controversial topic, but when I kind of go deeper into some of the claims that are being made out there, you know, I see that they're like the inconsistency of what they're basing their claims on, you know, on a statistical manner where it's like, I think there's like less than 12 cases that they have and like less than 50 cases total, which, wow. You know, when you compare it to other harmful things, they haven't really been able to conclusively pin down that the harm is coming from the Kava. a lot of what happens, and a lot of important element of our business is the sourcing, and a lot of when you have nutritional supplements that have combinations of other things or have a lot of other impurities with them, and these claims are being made by a combination of things where toxicity can come from other contaminants that are in substances or in nutritional supplements that aren't the pure kava, I would say that the glutathione, when it's produced naturally, the glutathione actually promotes healthy liver function. Anyway, that being said, though, there is a lot of inconclusive information, and so just do the research on it.
Right. Proceed with caution, but not too much caution. I mean, I feel the same way about mate. Like a lot of people talk about, oh, well, there's a study that shows cancer of the throat. And it's like, well, yeah, but people are drinking a piping hot liquid through a metal straw all day. I mean, hot enough liquids will also cause cell deformation, right? Or cell, breakdown. So I think it's really interesting. The point that you make is like correlation is not causality, one, and two, nobody's funding huge double-blind studies of kava and yerba mate because there's no money in it, which is just kind of a sad truth.
That, as well as like there are studies kind of showing that for treating anxiety that actually suggests that there's good or even better results in things like benzoids and things like that. So it's a very competitive kind of marketplace. But if they have one case, it can get amplified into just this whole array of bad press about it. And there's a lot of herbs out there like that, or a lot of things that are like that. I mean, there's another. I know you're going to ask probably about the kratom too, and It's really interesting to see that. Like, I was just reading this article tonight that was basically talking about how much more effective the use of kava for anxiety can be than some of the pharmaceutical substitutes.
Right.
And I was just kind of going to want to roll that into the kratom thing, as well, because it's like we do fight these fights quite a bit, and kratom happens to be pretty high on the list in terms of getting some pushback from the pharmaceutical industry. And, I have friends that do a lot of lobbying and kind of seeing it come in to a few states that have tried to ban it in that sense. In the article I was listening to today, it was talking about Georgia. It was talking about just basically the narcotic rehabilitation centers for opiate addictions and how much or how little compliance there is for that. But I just was kind of using that as the states that kind of are pushing the kratom out have this booming business in this opiate addiction field. And, not to say that the competitiveness around using this as an alternative as an opiate, but basically that it can be a very effective tool. And there's a lot of really powerful holistic medicine out there.
Totally.
That it's kind of being pushed aside without a real valid comparison.
Totally. I'll tell you when I lost hope or lost trust, I guess I should say, is I actually read a statistic that benzodiazepams and SSRIs and stuff like that they're kind of using as a patch-all when applied to PTSD, right, in our veteran community is 10% effective. And yet, you have guys like Clarence McKenna in the 60s and 70s using psilocybin, natural mushrooms, stuff like that, and having like 60 to 70%, granted in small trials, but 60 to 70% efficacy, which kind of blew my mind. The one exception here I think that's interesting is marijuana. Like now nobody can ignore that marijuana is more effective for glaucoma, more effective than a lot of painkillers, more effective for curing queasiness from chemotherapy. Like the drug has become so powerful, or the medicine I should say has become so powerful that even pharmaceutical companies can't seem to sweep it under the rug and say, well, no, we have like a drug that'll help with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I usually don't go down that path to kind of present that argument. The main thing that I'm trying to say is just the prevention of the holistic use of herbs is something that we're kind of always come upstream against.
Right.
And so it's just important to know that, a lot of the herbs and the relationships with the herbs, they have to be introduced and people have to kind of get through that threshold just to realize how harmless that they can be. They're still powerful medicines and at the same time, everything needs and deserves the respect of that. But, when you're kind of tit for tat comparatively, the invasiveness and most of these things have no toxicity at all. Mm-hmm. It's just really important that, people view these things with an open mind and get to experience them. And that's kind of where my practice comes in, is creating an environment to where people can have these experiences.
Right. Colter, tell me a little bit about kratom. I'm super interested in it. That was another one. It gave me a very different feeling from the kava, and I want to understand from your perspective a little bit better what it is and how it works.
So kratom is it's a leaf or a tree. It grows into a tree. It's mostly grown and prevalent in Southeast Asia, Thailand, and Indonesia, Malaysia. It's in the coffee family, believe it or not. Although it doesn't contain any caffeine. The way it works is it works on the opiate receptor. It's an opiate antagonist, and basically, it has a range of effects. I like to describe it as a stimulant as well as a sedative, depending on the dose size. What I personally notice is like an increase in sexual energy, kind of the same thing, more talkative, more social. It really helps to break down the sensitivity to physical and emotional pain. So it kind of takes your anxiety away. I believe it has a slightly euphoric effect for sure. Some people, on the energizing side, will take it to be better at monotonous tasks. If like you're going out there and digging a ditch or doing whatever, man, it just makes like everything a lot easier. On the other side, the larger doses that you take can have more of a sedating effect. Again, kind of taking your pain and your anxiety away. But if you get into that more relaxed state, your sensitivity to your surroundings become a lot more attuned. Right. Listening to music becomes a lot more pleasurable. Experience that I've got to have with it on heavier doses is kind of that walking dream state. Yep. Where you're at a place where you're lying down, you're awake, but you're kind of in the dream world. And man, it is really a really magical experience on that level. I mean, typically I'm not, going that deep on it in a sense, but the thing about it is it's just like any plants, and just to kind of come back a little bit to sourcing and quality, depending on how it's grown and how much sunlight it receives and what strain it is, because it is similar in cannabis in the way that there are many, many different varieties that have different types of effects. Some of them can be more pain relieving, and some can be more concentrated. And again, that's another thing that I would say about dosage. And everyone's physiology is a little different. So basically, some people are more sensitive to others. Some people are really sensitive to opiates in that sense, and how the opiate receptors get stimulated. So what I tell people to do is just approach it with caution in terms of dosage. Start with a much smaller dose. Probably the most harmful part of that is that it can cause nausea when people are really sensitive to it. Sometimes you want to take it on an empty stomach to kind of avoid that. But other than that, it's pretty harmless. It does have some potential addictive qualities, but nothing compared to any opiate or anything like that. I tell people to use it as a celebratory thing once or twice a week. I don't recommend using it every single day, but some people comparatively, and again, it's kind of comes back to this argument of what is an acceptable norm in relation to what type of relationship you have. People that are dependent on opiates, and again, going into the other side of where medicine plays a role to fix an ailment, where a lot of the times what I'm trying to do is create a preventative thing where people are experiencing joy and they're improving their energetics in their life. And so they're using these things to be able to rise above some of the challenges that they have in that sense. Yeah, just putting a disclaimer out there, for anything that has a sedative quality to it. Not that it's necessarily substantially impairing your judgment, but just to be respectful. If you're in a sedated mode, not to operate heavy machinery, not to drive a car, not to climb up a ladder, do things, put yourself where you're putting yourself at a greater risk when your judgment is impaired.
Absolutely. Colter, I want to ask you about one third ingredient that I know you guys use very prevalently and that I experienced, which was maca. Now, I didn't actually realize at the time maca and matcha are very different. So tell me a little bit about maca root.
Yeah, so maca root is a South American root tumor, and it has a lot of nutritional value, but it also has some really powerful adaptogenic qualities, as well as some really powerful aphrodisiac effects. Something I started out a long time ago, making some maca pancakes. The adaptogenic qualities, especially for women on the hormonal side, to try to kind of understand the adaptogenic class of herbs. For example, it kind of balances you. If you're too energized, it'll calm you down. If you're too calm, it'll energize you. If you've got too much estrogen in your system, you can balance that out. So it's really good for female hormones and things like that. But it definitely is a feel-good herb.
Awesome.
Try to describe kind of the same things that we're talking about, just things that make you feel good, and recognizing that feeling good is something that we all are very fond of, and really understanding how to bring things into our life that make us feel good. And Maca is definitely one of those things. Again, I kind of described me starting out, in the aphrodisiac category, and the joy of feeling that type of energy. It's very pleasurable. And you can definitely experience that with maca. It also has a very high nutritional value and a really great food to take on a regular basis. Just think of it as a superfood, basically.
Brilliant. I'm sure our audience is asking, like, okay, I get it. There's some super powerful plants and herbs and roots out there. And I'm sure our audience wants to know, how do they get started? I mean, how do they go down this path of seeing, which ones should they start with? When should they try them? We'll get in a little bit later about how we can encourage them to source them legally and safely and stuff like that. But how should people get started, Colter?
It's a good question. There's such a range of things. What we kind of ask at the bar is like, hey, how do you want to feel? Mm-hmm. Obviously to kind of break it down into some categories as far as things that are stimulating, things that are relaxing, things that are, geared towards health and wellness or for cleansing or, bringing minerals and nutrients into the body. Just to kind of list off some of the star players, I think cacao is a really powerful plant. It has a lot of history and ceremonial use and has some pretty powerful elements. The theobromine, which is very heart opening, which is kind of the cousin to caffeine, but it kind of has an energizing effect without kind of creating that jitter or that edginess to it. I really recommend that one because people, have a different kind of relationship with cacao. It's usually, and again, kind of want to emphasize again, I've talked about this a few times tonight, just the sourcing, the purity of anything is a really important factor to really get a true experience with it. Things that are adulterated and chocolate tends to be one of those things. I mean, the way that they're processing the cacao bean is usually, they're separating the cacao butter from the cocoa. Those things really work synergistically together, and a lot of the heat and the processing creates a lot lesser of a product.
Right.
But that being said, there's a lot of really great cacao out there. The less processed of anything is a really important part. We have a really great drinking chocolate. I think you tried it on the boat. Mm-hmm. It's actually started at Elixir. It's called Cacao. The company's well on its way, doing really well. We just did some talks at LIB together. So that's a good one to start with. It has a kind of a universal, broader appeal to it. On the health and wellness side, there's a lot of things we haven't talked about that I'm just going to throw out there. I won't go too deep into them. There's one substance called shilajit, and this is all kind of stuff that is kind of a health and wellness component to detoxifying the body, bringing nutrients in. Shilajit is basically an earth resin that is a million-year-old plant in marine life that's been fermenting in the tectonic plates for millions of years, and it comes out as a black resin ooze. But it's basically the most base organic building blocks of life that your body assimilates really quickly and pushes out all the toxins. So it has a real grounding. It's also super alkalizing to the body, really nourishes the adrenals, which, again, gaining energy and things like I said, how we describe some of these herbs, things that are energizing, things that are taxing the adrenals have a very powerful effect, but they can have a harmful effect on the body if used in excess, like caffeine and things like that. I mean, obviously we know how prevalent it is in our culture. We all like to boost our energy throughout the day. But that being said, there are a lot of these tonic herbs and a lot of these Chinese herbs that nourish the body. And the shilajit happens to be one of them where you actually get energy from actually nourishing the adrenals instead of taxing them. It's actually one of the really good things I recommend for people getting off coffee because it reverses the harmful effects of coffee. Coffee is a really high acid, and so the shilajit is real alkalizing to the intestine, to the gut. And then it also nourishes the adrenals and has a real earthy taste, a really neat thing. And it's pretty unknown. It's something people want to explore, some cool exotic substances that are really, really good for you. That's another one. This kind of gets into the superfood category a little bit, not playing as much with our energetics, but still has an effect because when your body's working right, you're going to feel it and you're going to like it. Moringa ofero is basically one of the most nutrient-dense foods in the world, on the planet. The type of nutrients and minerals and vitamins it has in it and the quantities that it has in it is off the chart when you compare it to other things. I mean, 14 times more calcium than milk, 14 times more potassium than bananas, 9 times more iron than spinach, more vitamin A, more vitamin E, 10 or 12 different amino acids, vitamins, minerals. I mean, it's a really powerful plant, and it actually grows in really arid places. And having the aminos is really helpful to just the whole healing process. So that's one I highly recommend people check out. Well, it's on my list. One drink I mentioned at the beginning that's probably one of our best sellers. And, if anybody wants to come to the site and try something out that's handcrafted from Elixir, it's the Saffron Spice Elixir. Mm-hmm. So saffron is a really powerful plant, really powerful in the sense of it's boosting mood, fixing depression, helping with eyesight, anti-cancer properties, anti-inflammatory properties. Primarily, though, we use it as a mood booster, just a feel-good, happy experience. The drink itself, we make in a latte style, and it is such a pleasure to drink, and it just instantly shifts your mood and uplifts you. It's a really awesome thing to kind of see it happen in the bar, after a couple sips.
Wow.
That's one I speak really highly of. Another thing that we really work a lot with that's obviously gaining a lot of popularity out there is turmeric. And that's one of the really powerful, masterful plants. Inflammation in the body and comfort in the body is such a key part to comfort and to our wellness. There's so many masterful master plants out there that are so effective, and you notice them right away. What I was kind of going into, just about being an expert and really understanding that experience is the best teacher. I mean, learning about some of these plants and bringing them to your life and seeing how they affect you is the start. But it's also about creating a practice, and at that point, it's a lifestyle choice, improving a lifestyle. And that's where kind of the bar and surrounding yourself with people that really are trying to find things and making choices that are healthy choices. The herbs themselves, they're not going to work if you don't take them. So creating that practice. And a lot of times it's regularity. People sometimes expect to have an instant gratification society. And some of these things are profound and you feel them immediately. But as you bring it to your life and you really start to integrate them, you'll really see a very powerful effect. That's kind of the key points is start with one or two things. And if it's something you really want to go with, and I recommend turmeric. We've got a really powerful CO2 extractic turmeric extract you take as a shot. You can mix drinks with it. We have a really great drink we call it the Golden Healer. I think you experienced that a little bit on the boat. Mm-hmm. A couple of turmeric drinks we had out there.
So Colter, that's actually a really good segue. Where can people get this stuff? I mean, I know you guys offer some of the products online, a lot of the products only in the bar. I'm sure people in the audience are wondering, like, dude, when can I buy this Elixir stuff and have it shipped to me? Or, if not, if it's, something like regulation, like where can they buy stuff like Kava, stuff like Kratom, all that kind of stuff? Like, where would you recommend people source? And obviously, if they can buy it from you, I'm sure listeners in the audience would prefer to support you guys.
For sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, we've got some offerings on our website. We've got a little ways to go to bring some of the other things that I've talked about. We do have a few Kava products, and we're constantly expanding our offering. I would say like the reputability of sources, as far as the Chinese tonic herbs and some really amazing plants and Chinese tonic herbs, I'd recommend Ron Teagarden, Dragon Herbs. He was one of my mentors and, one of my peers. I remember, probably 20 years ago, I went to his bar in Santa Monica, and they offered up me called Heaven's Drops, and it was like a $300 bottle of ginseng. And then I took a couple of those drops, and I swear everything became light. I felt like I was in heaven there for a brief moment. So I would say that where you are sourcing things is really important, but Dragon Herbs is a lot of products that we carry. His products at the bar, we put them in our drinks. A really, really great company. The Shilajit that I mentioned, Pure Black, is the brand we use there. And it's really important to really understand that's a source that really needs purity because your body's assimilating it so quickly and it'll carry anything with it. It also works great as a catalyst. So any of these other herbs that you're using, combine it with the Shilajit. That's one of my morning routines is taking the Shilajit, combining it with a few other tonic herbs, Sustance, and a couple other ones that I use. The Moringa is gaining a lot more popularity out there. I've been using this product called Zija. It's a pretty convenient product. It is a MLM. You can still sign up to it without having to sell it to other people, but it's a really good product. But there's a lot of good organic Moringa that you can buy out there. I do recommend getting organic whenever you can. And you can get that just about anywhere, if it's organic. It's a pretty widespread plant. The Kava, I would say buy the Kava from us. We do sell it online. We have a few Kava concentrates. Another person I should give some props to is the Root of Happiness. He's one of the Kava gurus that is really doing a lot. I mentioned just legislatively to spread the word and keep people, focused on the benefits of Kava as well as some of the other medicine that I've mentioned. We're not selling Kratom ourselves on our website yet. We will eventually. There's a lot of sources for it out there. It's pretty prevalent out there. I would say try to find an organic source. It's a really hard thing to find organically, but just dabble on different websites. I don't have one to recommend per se, but try the different strains. The Meng Dot and getting the highest alkaloid content is really important. The green and white strains tend to be more energizing. The red strains tend to be a little bit more sedating, but, just try a little bit of each. The internet obviously is a huge source for that. And again, we're trying to build our brand up to be able to offer that. A lot of the drinks that we offer, we have a chai drink that we offer that's made with maca. It's got a lot of different Chinese tonic herbs in it. It's also a really great coffee substitute. We have caffeinated versions and non-caffeinated versions of it. We have some other kind of cutting edge products. We have a product called Theta Gold that's basically nano-sized gold suspended in water that is actually had some really neat clinical studies of improving the IQ after a month of prolonged use. Really helps the body communicate. Has, gold itself obviously has a very powerful energetic component to it. It's been used throughout history for a lot of different health and spiritual connections, and I've had some pretty neat experiences with it. So it's another one to kind of check out there.
Very cool.
There's also a full range of herbs. We have a whole line of herbal teas that are just stuff that you steep that tastes good, that are kind of designed for certain ailments, whether it's tummy or relaxation or sexuality or tranquility. So we have a full line of that, of different herbal formula teas that are really neat. Gynostemma is another one that's I recommend out there. It's a non-caffeinated herbal drink. It's an adaptogenic plant. It's a longevity plant. There's stories of villages. They call it poor man's tea. And there's a lot of villages in China before it was really discovered where they couldn't afford tea, and they'd go out and pick the stuff in the wild, and then they'd see that everyone in the village was living to over 100 years old. And they did these studies, and they found it's because they were drinking this Gynostemma. Jia Gulong is another name for it.
Brilliant.
The cool thing about it is that because our society, our culture, and, I can't address what it's like for you there, but in our American culture, it's dominated by corporate interests. And so the media and what you get to learn about these things, you have to kind of dig a little bit beneath the surface, but there's a huge wealth of information out there. And there's so many treasures of nature that if you can really just take the time and have the interest, and that's kind of a big part of where I feel my purpose is to introduce some of these things. And the rest is up to you. The main thing is that there's so many treasures of nature out there to bring into your life and to form a positive relationship with it. But again, let the experience be yours. Listen and be subjective and form your relationship with nature.
Brilliant. Colter, I want to thank you so much for your time. I know we've had a ton of technical difficulties that hopefully the audience won't know about. Everything I'm sure will be stitched up together, but you've been really patient and really generous with your time and just shared so much wisdom and value. I think this conversation delivered everything to our audience that I hoped it would, and so much more. So I do hope we keep in touch, and I'm really looking forward to ordering some of the products myself. I also encourage our audience to do the same at elixart.com, ELIXART.com. And if people want to get in touch with you and learn a little bit more, where should we send them?
Well, my personal email address is colter@elixart.net or .com. If you're in California, come into our shop in Nevada City, California, and tune into us at Facebook as well. And we got a lot of really neat events and some really cool pictures there. And hopefully be coming to a town near you one of these days.
Awesome. So, Colter, once again, thank you so much, my friend. And I do hope we keep in touch. I'm sure I'll see you on the Summit Conference Biohacker Circuit.
Jonathan, thanks so much for this opportunity. Real pleasure to speak with you. You really have a great thing going on here, and really, again, appreciate being a part of it.
Thank you, sir. All right, Colter, take care, man.
Okay, bye now.
All right, super friends, that's it for this week's episode. We hope you really, really enjoyed it and learned a ton of applicable stuff that can help you go out there and overcome the impossible. If so, please do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes or Stitcher or however you found this podcast. In addition to that, we are always looking for great guest posts on the blog or awesome guests right here on the podcast. So if you know somebody or you are somebody or you have thought of somebody who would be a great fit for the show or for our blog, please reach out to us either on Twitter or by email. Our email is info@becomingasuperhuman.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Becoming Superhuman podcast. For more great skills and strategies, or for links to any of the resources mentioned in this episode, visit www.becomingasuperhuman.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.